Sylvia and me.
Sylvia and
Sylvia and me. Sylvia and
Sylvia. Sylvia and me.
What I truly value is my journey as an immigrant writer when I actually experienced a certain chapter of my life in America and sat down to write a story which many South Asian women have been very scared or afraid or ashamed to talk about or write about fully in the open.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Beckerman, host of the podcast series Sylvia and Me, conversations with inspiring, empowering women.
Hi, I'm Varuni. I'm a writer. I've been a writer pretty much for the last 15 years when I started my journey in advertising back home in India, and then switched to journalism and writing for magazines and things like that here in New York. Writing is what I love to do. In New York, I've had the opportunity to work for magazines like Time Out New York, for places like Guggenheim, before working for other websites and things like that. But what I truly value is my journey as an immigrant writer when I actually experienced a certain chapter of my life in America and sat down to write a story which many South Asian women have been very scared or afraid or ashamed to talk about or write about fully in the open. So I think from my research, I'm the first South Asian woman who's actually written her own autobiography, chronicling what's actually going on with these women, close to about 500,000, if not more, in current day America. Yeah.
Okay.
And Sylvia and me.
Well, really, thank you so much for joining me here today. And you took a lot of the introduction describing yourself. One of the things you left out is that you are the author of the newly released book, Golden Handcuffs, An Immigrant's Pursuit of Happiness. And that's the memoir that you just spoke about. And yes, I can understand that a lot of people, especially in today's day and age, with everything, are hesitant to write about it. And it's not just a story of you and your journey from India. It's also a story of what happens when you come as an immigrant into the U.S.
Yes.
And your story, as you said, you were a copywriter, you were writing, then you went to academia. When you were in India, you met and fell in love with a young man named Aman, and you fell in love with him while realizing that he actually lives you met him in India. He lives in Michigan.
Yes.
A little bit different than India. He's a surgeon. And so you followed your love and you immigrated to the US.
Yes.
And then you came across, your first thing was you needed to get a student visa. Although you had, 3 masters in India, none of that translated to anything in the United States. You had to start all over.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So tell us, what was the first thing that you needed to do? What was the visa that you actually went on? Because you were married, you got married.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah. When I met my husband, who I've called Aman because I've changed everyone's names in the books, barring mine, to protect, their, he told me that I will come, we kept dating for 2.5 to 3 years, and he was reluctant to bring me over before I understood what being married to him meant in terms of the spousal visa, which is the H-4 visa. And he said that one of the things he was really attracted to me in was his own drive. Like, he's a very ambitious, hardworking, but very honest surgeon. Because his family had struggled with similar, his dad had had a stroke when he was very young. And so that's the drive that he really liked in me. And he liked that we belonged to 2 different worlds. Like, he was a man of medicine. I was I was in a completely different world. And like, art and writing is something that he really would bring our worlds together. He thought that's good. But the spousal visa wouldn't allow, me to work. And that is because the law existed in that sense. for many years since the year 1990. The wives, because mostly the spouses were women. It's not that there aren't men on this visa. They could not, in the original way in which the visa existed, did not have the legal right to work. It's only when in the year 2015 that there was a slight change in that law, which if the H-1B immigrant had, like, so in this case, my husband, had he fulfilled certain steps in the green card application process, then the spouse would be given the right to work. But I got married in 2013. I met Aman in 2011. So given those circumstances, he was kind of like preparing me for what it would mean, because when we started talking to each other, it wasn't so obvious to us that we would be so attracted to each other and so involved over across continents, right? And we kept just like, it was like old-fashioned love where we're writing to each other or talking on the phone mostly, because his life is very, very busy. He's always on the go. I mostly, even now after 11 years of marriage, talk to him more on the phone, because by the time he comes back home, he's bone dead tired, right?
So you and your husband had a true long distance relationship.
Yes, long
And
distance.
it lasted. It
Yeah.
lasted, and you got married. So you went to the States on a student visa, if I'm not
On a spousal visa first, but because he had told me, because of the way the law existed, he himself is like a bigger feminist. He was brought up by a tiger mom. Mostly she was single because she had to take care of her ailing husband who'd had a stroke when he'd met with an accident. So you know, that was his role model. His role model was a woman who can take care of any kind of problems, still work, and, you know, manage any kind of adversity, right? So that's what he expected his spouse to be. So he did not want to in any way feel like he's controlling me in terms of finances or, you know, my opportunity to work or anything. So as soon as I come to the United States, to Detroit first, where I was, he tells me that I want you to apply to as many universities as you like. Money is not a problem, but as soon as you get into the best program out there for you, please go on an independent track from me. Go back home, come back as a student, and then try to make your immigrant journey independent of me, because I don't want to control you.
Well, and as you said back then, if you had stayed on a spousal visa, you would not have been able to work.
No, I wouldn't have, and we didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you went back home, and then you applied to many, many universities.
Yes.
You wound up getting into several of them, and the one that you really liked had a great writing program, I believe, and that was in Syracuse.
Yes.
New York. And at that same time, your husband got a job in New York City.
Yes. And he was very happy because he's like, New York City is just a place for you, because as soon as you're done with your, you know, journalism program, you can, you know, you just come here. You don't have to worry about finding a place to live, which is quite a struggle for many aspiring writers, you know. So all of that is taken care of. You just have to focus on getting a great job, but you better get a job as soon as you're out.
So you originally go on a spousal visa, you go back home, you apply to universities, you get into the University of Syracuse in New York, you then apply for a student visa.
Yes. I was able to, I was able to do most of those applications while I was in the United States. Then I went back, switched to the F1, which is the student visa, and came back. Yeah.
And the thing is, after that, you must work.
Yes, you have to work, because a student visa, especially in the arts, like if you are on, say, a tech program or a science program, you still get longer duration after you graduate university to find a job. I think back then it was at least 2 years. When you're in an arts program, you just have 1 year. So the clock's ticking. As soon as you graduate, you cannot not work. So you have just I suppose you don't land a job, or you know, unfortunately lose a job, you can only not be, you know, working for 3 months. Otherwise, you have to go back. So it's like you have to go.
So you're in Detroit, you go back home, you moved. He's in New York City. You find a place in Syracuse. In fact, you needed any kind of financial aid or so on. I mean, that again, because you're not a citizen, you can't just, you had to have somebody co-sign for it. Okay, so now we're done with school. You get a job.
Yeah.
So now you've fulfilled what you need to do.
Yeah.
And you got a job that I believe you liked. It was you were an assistant editor for a publishing firm.
Yes.
But that didn't exactly, although you thought you were doing quite well and you were very diligent about what you were doing, you were working hard, your husband's working hard, and you come up with, you're faced with what could or could not have been workplace harassment by a one of your bosses, a woman who you call Molly. And you do what we're told to do, and that is you go to a supervisor and you try to figure out, you don't even say her name, you try to figure out what you could do to make you look, better. What are you doing wrong? What could you do? And the very next day you're let go.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was going through your mind? Because as you just said, you only have 3 months before you have to go back to India.
Yeah, it was quite a shocker because I had never experienced something like that. I had been working since the age of 21, even back home in India. And here it was a completely different environment. This was my first real exposure to working full time, for a publishing house. And also you draw a lot of self-confidence, right, as a writer, from the feedback that you get from people who are senior to you. So it could be your editor-in-chief. And, in this case, I had a great working relationship with both my editor as well as the CEO. But in a matter of 2.5 weeks, my entire performance and what I was bringing to the table turned upside down when I had to go back home to take care of a few things back home related to my brother's health. When I came back, it was like what the protagonist in Devil's Wear Prada goes through. It was pretty much like that. I felt like I was in her shoes. But in hindsight, I don't think this had anything to do with me being an immigrant. Me being an immigrant really just contributed to the cluelessness that I had in terms of reading how I was being played, right? I was too naive or trusting. And this is New York City. Now I have come across enough examples of people who are in similar situations where they have to constantly watch their back, not only when they're walking on the streets, but it's like that, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're in medicine, any sort of office in New York is cutthroat, and someone's out there to get you. So if you're actually doing well, you should also know how to protect yourself by not trying to get too much attention on yourself. So I guess I didn't know how to.
You were learning.
Yeah, I was learning. I was like, this is my first job, right? At a much older age. When we are younger, when my first job in India, I was 21. So you just go, you learn faster. Here I'm 20, I think I was 27 and a half or 28. And I'm trying to understand the body language or, the cues and nuances in a different culture, right? So that takes a while. So you figure some things out, but certain things you really can't. There's a lot going on.
Well, there's a learning curve.
It's a learning curve.
And one of the other things that you have mentioned in your writing is the fact that although you spoke fluent English, it's not the same. British English is not the same as American. The language is used differently.
It's a completely different ballgame. So American English is very to the point, shorter sentences, and they're completely different phrases, which exist in British English and completely different in American. So even when I was doing my internships at time out, I had to learn how to work on this switch, where you're listening to the same language, but it's not. So you're constantly trying to learn what you're watching on the TV, what you're reading in the newspaper and things like that, and trying to mimic it in a way that you can now play with that language and bring it into your work, right? So it's a lot that I'm doing. And so when this happens and Molly starts, like basically representing or misrepresenting me as somebody who's incompetent, I really didn't have enough to kind of show for myself, because that's not something which you can prove. Writing and editing is very subjective. And so maybe she was right, maybe I was right. Either way, I get fired the next day. I just know that I was shit scared, because I was like, I lost all my confidence. And confidence is key to owning your voice as a writer. You cannot write even a sentence if you feel you don't have it in you to express yourself.
Well,
But
that's really true with any job, especially in a competitive, high-powered. If you don't have the confidence in yourself to really in what you're doing, it's very difficult to really move forward, especially in a competitive world.
yeah.
So now you're in a place where you know you only have 3 months to find another job. You speak to the CEO who had been you had gotten along with, and this was kind of a push from your husband, who
Yes.
told you you can't let your feelings
Yeah.
stop you from doing what you need to do. This is reality, and you have 3 months. So go back to her and ask her, because she did say to you that you could stay there until you found a new job, but you needed those 3 months.
Yeah.
Because at that point, weren't you, because now the year has changed and the laws have changed, where on a spousal visa, you would be able to work.
Yes.
Okay. So now you have 3 months. They give you a part-time job at the publishing firm so that you can do that. And you're spending your days that you're not working. You're fervently looking for a job.
Yeah.
What were the main stumbling blocks? Because you were people would say, oh, this is great, you have the qualifications.
Yes. I think this is something that I did not pick up, and now in hindsight, I know what was going on. Firstly, there was the law had recently changed, so there was still a stigma which was associated with a spousal visa. I think that I didn't read that because you don't really know. You don't know what you're doing right or wrong early on. So while my qualifications were great, and these are the same qualifications, in fact, I had fewer when I had just graduated, and I was able to land 2 jobs. I picked one. I picked this second one at the publishing house. But I was getting opportunities right off the bat. But here, when I would start talking about my, whenever I would land an interview, when the interviewer would ask me too many details about my, employment, whether I can work or not, at times they would very directly ask me what was my immigrant status. And as soon as they would hear the word H4 or spousal visa, and in some cases I offered it to them, it wasn't just them, I offered it to them. This is not a question which any employee is, they're not supposed to ask candidates that. It's not permitted. As long as you have the legal right to work, which means you have the employment card or the papers, you're fine. But when you have this chip on your shoulder, right, or you feel that there's something which could not go your way, all your energy is kind of like directed psychologically towards that. So maybe there was something that I was doing wrong in that sense. But I went through countless interviews where I did come across another problem, which I think writers go through, and this has nothing to do with me being an immigrant, but there were people who wanted me to write for them, and because they had seen my work, and they also saw all my published work here in America as well, and they were like, would you like to work for exposure? Right? And I was like, what does that even mean? And that means that I will be creating content for free. In some cases, they would let me use my byline, and that's about it. I would not really get any compensation, any money for that. And I think that many writers take that, they do take up those opportunities just to kind of build a portfolio of works. But I think that is exploitation for sure. And so those were the kind of opportunities that I was getting a lot as well. And in some other cases, I just ran into people who would straight off ask me, what is your social security number? Like they would send me a form where they would expect me to fill out all my details, which were basically scams, right? Which somebody is running. And
Right.
they think, and like, since you're literally fresh off the boat, you don't know. In fact, there was this one time that I was actually going to sit down and fill out that form. It just so happened that my husband was there and he was like, what are you even doing? Like, use your common sense, And it's just that you're so desperate that you're just trying to figure out something that should work for you, that you didn't even think twice before putting yourself and your own husband in danger. So
So,
there were, yeah. So I went
okay.
through a crazy number of applications, even while I was still, my CEO allowed me to, just, be there. But like what actually was a tactical problem was, currently I had a visa, right, which showed that I will not be able to work in 3 months. And my lawyer is working on switching me to the next one, right? So when I am going and fielding these applications, the moment they would ask me for more information, right, I have to explain all this to them. And it's just too much for them to deal with. They just need a person who can come in and start working for them. And they don't want to, nobody wants to deal with extra work, extra paperwork. And so that tends to happen to immigrants for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And let's now veer toward the social issue, the making friends and so on. Your husband worked long hours. He was working in Manhattan. You had an apartment in Manhattan. And here you are, you're spending your time looking for a job.
Yeah.
How was it as far as feeling lonely, feeling yourself, because you were so independent? You'd been working a long time. Now you're not even in Detroit anymore. You're in Manhattan, which is, New York City, which is so totally different experience than any place else. How was it on a social level? Were you able to make friends, or did you?
I really struggled because, and this is very surprising because I'm a very extroverted person otherwise, and I had no trouble making friends throughout my life. But and also a very independent person in terms of figuring out opportunities for myself, even during these very early years of my immigrant journey, I did pretty well without too much guidance from my husband. But when I lose that job and I'm not able to secure the next opportunity for myself, and I keep running against the wall, I kind of just I experienced what many women had experienced in my shoes, but that knowledge wasn't available to me. A lot of immigrant women who are on this visa, and even otherwise who come from other countries, they go through experiences like this in the category that we exist in, which is often referred to as the model minority, right? There are very high expectations for success from your own family members. Like my husband did not ever have the option to not be a doctor or like a high performing individual. He was born to a woman who would tear him apart if he was any less. So the pressure is very, very real. And the fact that I wasn't being able to, even land a simple opportunity, in my mother-in-law's eyes, that was absolute failure. And I really, really valued and respected that woman. But because and every time I would, talk to her, she could not understand. And people who have that sort of outlook towards life, they're not satisfied with effort. They only want results. So on the one hand, I'm dealing with her. And whenever I talk to anyone in my community here, right, in America, they don't want to talk about it because they've been through it. They've been through the shame of it. They've been through not being able to work at all for many, many, many years. So they're like, just deal with it. I mean, what is, like, we've been through it. So when you've been through something like that and eventually given up on even trying to work, right? And you're in that sort of funk and now depression, you don't really want others to even try and get out of it. So the kind of feedback I had gotten from the few South Asians that I'd met was never supportive. There's usually, as first generation immigrants, not only amongst Indians, but in other communities like Korean, Japanese, and all that I've come across, this sense of competition, or this sense of, you can't even deal with this, or like, or suck it up, like, why are you crying, kind of a thing. But when I spoke to people back home, right, they're like, what is the problem? You're in New York City, you're married to a stroke surgeon, you're living the dream. You're in America, you're living the dream. What are you even crying about? And to look at it, like, we were staying right opposite Manhattan. We were in Long Island City,
Mhm.
which is a very fancy part of Queens. And it's like you stepped out into the balcony and you would get the entire view of the Manhattan skyline, Chrysler building straight ahead. But through years of therapy now, since then, I've realized that I was so depressed, and I was so, because what I went through was so much isolation. Most of the friends that immigrants make are friends that they initially start making through work. And they define a lot of their identity through their work, because that's the only reason why they're so far away from home, right?
Right.
And slowly they learn, okay, this is how you talk to people, this is how you dress, or this is how you, like, go to meetups and meet other interesting people who might be, doing the things that you like doing. But if you don't have that work as an anchor, especially in that sort of model minority sort of community, um, you you're you feel like a big fat failure. And that's what I felt like. I felt that in that beautiful apartment that we were living in, which was a glass building opposite Manhattan, I thought everybody outside could look straight into that building at me, at my at what a big fat failure I am. And I felt like I'm this albatross, like this, hanging on my husband's neck, bringing him down. That's exactly what I felt like.
Okay. So
Yeah.
now I want to move just a little bit forward. It's about the same time you're going through this depression, and your husband announces that he has gotten an offer for a position in California, which he is going to take, but he does not want you to go with him. And the reason is not because he wants to split up. He wants you to work on you. He wants you to find your passion again. He wants you not to bring him down, or for you to bring yourself down. And that is probably the best thing that happened to you, because you started doing some volunteer work.
Yeah.
And one of the places you worked at was in Harlem, Mountain Lawn City Camp.
Yes. Yes.
Which, from what I understand, kind of changed your perspective. That and a friend of yours who had you take your camera out.
Yes. Yes.
So tell us how you started to connect, how you started to, I know you mentioned you've been in therapy, but in order to know that you need therapy and to move to that step, how did you decide that your journey, you weren't going to let anyone stop you? Because, of course, if you're taking pictures of people, I'm sure you're going to get people, as you did. Lady, what are you doing? Don't you dare take the picture. But you met a couple of people who encouraged, who talked to you. So tell us about that. Tell us a little bit about that journey, because that kind of melded everything together for you, your husband, and where you are now.
Yeah. So the first thing that happened was when my husband decided to go away to Los Angeles. That was after close to about 2 to 3 years where I locked myself in my apartment before the lockdown. Because I don't have any confidence in me to even step outside. I even stopped taking care of myself as a human being. Like I did not eat properly or even shower for, weeks. This is something which people have spoken about during COVID when they were in lockdown. They wouldn't take good care of themselves. But I experienced when you are in extreme depression, you kind of start the chaos and the darkness that you feel inside is what you start, doing to the place that you live in. And so I was exposing my husband to that, and he not only had to deal with that, he had to deal with a very foul-tempered woman that is what I became. And I was drinking. I would start drinking to numb the pain of having lost my entire identity and things like that. And every time he would come back home, he had to deal with that anger, which was now directed at him, because I'm like, I wouldn't be in these shoes. I wouldn't be in a situation of what a spousal visa has to go, a spouse has to go through without a spousal visa. And guess what? It's because of you, right? Because I'm married to you. And he tried very hard to problem solve. He tried to tell me that, hey, why don't you do some programming boot camps? Why don't you learn filmmaking? So he's still trying to pull me out of that hole of despair. But when you're in that place, the one person who's trying to pull you out, you will turn against that person. And that's what I had become. So at that point, he had decided to go away to Los Angeles because he's like, only you can help you. And before he went, he did get me like a dog, a golden retriever and a Labrador mix. He trained the dog. He made sure that, he knew how to walk properly and things like that. And then he just went away telling me that the rent's taken care of, the apartment's taken care of. All you have to do is now figure out, what would you do if everything is taken care of? How would you find yourself? And I think it was important, even though at that time I was extremely angry at him for taking that decision, because having removed himself from that place, right, that absolute hell that our relationship had become, he removed that one person who I was conveniently blaming all my failure, all my, resentment towards. And now that that person's gone away, I didn't have an excuse but to somehow figure out a solution to a very difficult problem, right? And the fact was that I couldn't stay inside that apartment because I felt, I
You
felt
had a
that
dog. You had to take care of the dog.
I had to
See
take
that?
care of the dog. And also, from what I know, I was very scared of the balcony now. I was scared of the balcony. We were on the 10th floor because somehow I knew that I was going towards suicidal tendencies as well pretty rapidly. I understand that now. I didn't want to stay there. It was just like, as soon as he went, for me, it was like, just get out. So first I changed the apartment. I moved to a different part of Brooklyn, which was still a very fancy apartment, right? It was just slightly cheaper than that one. And because my dog was so active and energetic, I needed to walk him at least 3 to 4 times. Otherwise, he will start chewing through my shoes and destroying furniture. So now I'm outside, I'm walking my dog, and something very bizarre happens. I just start randomly talking to people on the streets of the city. And most of these conversations, I thought at first were because my dog is very cute and good looking. But I think that there were many instances of such encounters that had started taking place even when we'd not adopted the dog. And it was almost like these chance encounters would happen in a way that I could not predict. People would just walk up to me and they would just start talking to me. And then they would start sharing intimate details about their life or troubles that they're going through or ups and downs in their, say, married life, to having lost somebody. And like once they would start talking, the person wouldn't stop. And I just felt like compelled to stand there and listen to this person. And when they would be talking, they could be talking about things which might seem very unrelatable, but I would understand everything in those moments. I would understand all their pain, all their suffering, all their anger, everything. And I would just come back home and just keep thinking about, why the hell is this happening to me? Because the frequency with which these encounters would happen were like morning, evening, the next day again, And these incidents never took place earlier. In fact, I used to feel very isolated because I would never talk to people on the subway or the streets. But here it's like, I felt like I'm a magnet, which is attracting these stories. And I still can't explain this because this only lasted during those 2 to 3 years. Most of the times when I was out with my dog, but many times not. And I would just come back and I would start writing these stories down, and I started recording them on a page that I'd started back then called Married in New York, because it was a spin on what I was. I was just a married
Right.
woman in New York City. So I started sharing these stories, and the page started, like kind of growing pretty organically, from a couple of hundred to like 3,000 followers eventually, without too many promotions or anything like that. And if I wouldn't share what I had gone through on the streets of America on a particular day, people would write to me, followers would write to me, and they would ask me, hey, what happened? But it was very bizarre that these stories started healing me, because as I was walking on the streets, it was a time like this where in the country where I think elections and things were going to take place. Everybody was suspicious of the other camp. People were being divided and played by politics and politicians. But on the streets, no matter who I met, any race, any ethnicity, any background, accent, or whatever, they were just human beings like me, right? And they were just sharing stories of their everyday, life, just like me. And they were struggling much more than I had ever struggled. And here I was lamenting that I did not have a job, right? The one thing in my life wasn't working out, and that was a job. And because of that one little thing, I was willing to set fire on everything else that was working out for me. My relationship, my husband, the fact that I still had, the money to figure out if I can do something else, maybe if I could launch a business. I don't know. I never thought of so many things that could possibly work out for me. And here I'm sitting still in a pretty luxurious apartment, right? And that one thing I've allowed to destroy and break me down so much. And it's at that point that I decide that I want to work for the homeless in the city. And that's why I first started off with Varuni Mission, which is a missionary organization which takes care of the homelessness in the city. But they wanted me to teach art and creative writing to the kids in certain poorer neighborhoods of Brooklyn and Manhattan. And that's Montalon City Camp. And they felt that I would be the right person for the job. Then again, those kids, I thought I was teaching them, but they were teaching me, and they were healing me.
You were
every day.
open to it. You needed, for some of us, we need to hit rock bottom. And when I say rock bottom, it's within us in order to be able to find out who we are and pull ourselves back up.
Yeah.
And you had the wherewithal to open your ears and listen.
Yeah.
Because had you not wanted to heal yourself, you would have walked away from those people. You would not have listened to their stories. But that's inbred in you. So,
yeah, I think that there was so many times when I was on the streets, I was talking to a homeless person. There was this guy, his name was Mario. I still remember him. I still hope that he's okay. This was in Williamsburg, and he used to always sleep on a bench, and he had asthma. And he would talk about how grateful he is that he has asthma, and he doesn't suffer from other more serious illnesses that his friends have, because it's absolutely impossible to survive without any, people who are on the streets, they don't have health insurance. They don't have anything that will allow them to even get the next meal, forget about like serious medication that they might need. But this guy, he was grateful that he just had asthma. That is a perspective that you're getting from a homeless guy who did not need anything from me. I tried to buy him coffee a couple of times, and he said, I don't need coffee. He just wanted to sit down and talk to me, because Starbucks would give him coffee on their own. So that's the kind of, like, you learn, first of all, about human dignity, and you learn about what people actually go through, the pain that people can actually endure, which will make you question your own tragedy, and then secondly, like when I worked with the kids in Montalon City Camp, right? I saw their mothers. Their mothers are very hardworking women from working class families, and they did have to think about how the hell are they going to, figure out where the kids are going to go. They don't have the money to, get a nanny. Many of them have 3 or 4 kids, and there was this one woman. I think she was on the streets. She was living on the streets, and somehow she was figuring out ways to still take good care of her son. So when you see that with your own naked eyes, you actually, your entire mind will change. And I didn't have an option. I had reached a point of no return in my mind when I hit depression, and nobody was there to help me. My parents were too far away. And in fact, I didn't share a lot of my journey with my dad, who's actually a social geographer, who's worked for the margins of India, who's actually helped, people who are from very poor communities and things like that. I never shared what I was going through with him, because he had warned me when I had told him many, many years ago when I was in India that I want to get married, when he wanted me to just be a very successful academic. And he told me that he was very disappointed that I'm choosing to marry instead of being fine, being this person in academia. And I thought, his words kind of just echoed in my head during those times. And like, that if you choose to be married, a married woman is all you will ever be. And I thought that was like my predicament. Yeah.
Well, Varuni, your journey from immigrating to finding yourself, to helping so many people and allowing yourself to help yourself is a story that is so uplifting for so many immigrants and so many people, period, who feel so lost and have no idea where to go. And I know that, the situations on immigration right now are so up in the air. Everything is so topsy-turvy that we're not going to go into it, because I don't even know where to begin. But what I do want to do is I want to thank you so much for taking the time, for the journey that you are sharing, for your stories that you have allowed all these people to have a voice. It's all about sharing stories, to have that not only need, but the ear to listen and the voice to be able to tell it. And you tell it absolutely wonderfully in Golden Handcuffs, An Immigrant's Pursuit of Happiness. Where can people find out more about you?
They can go to my website, varunisinha.com. And if you want to buy my book, all the information's right there. Otherwise, it's on Amazon, as well as Barnes & Noble.
Again, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with me here today and to tell your story.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you for having me.
You can find us on all of your popular podcast platforms. And of course, our website, sylviaandme.com. Stay safe, stay healthy, and as always, stay tuned.